Civilizations that never met one another all reached the same conclusion. The breath is the hidden lever of human potential. High in the Himalayas, Indian yogis developed pranayama to channel prana. On the Tibetan plateau, monks refined tummo to create internal heat and open non-physical channels. In China, Taoists mapped the movement of qi through the body and linked deep breathing to longevity. Greeks spoke of pneuma, Hebrews of ruach, early Christians of the Holy Spirit, different languages for the same principle. Every tradition agreed on 2 points. First, that ordinary breathing leaves most of this energy untapped. Second, that deliberate breathing can lift the mind beyond its usual limits. Modern physiology is finally catching up. When you inhale slowly through the nose and send air to the bottom of the lungs, stretch receptors activate the vagus nerve, lowering heart rate and calming the amygdala. Carbon dioxide levels rise just enough to dilate blood vessels in the brain, sharpening focus. A balanced pattern of oxygen and carbon dioxide also stabilizes the pH of cerebral fluid, keeping neural firing efficient. Researchers looking at practitioners of yogic or tummo breathing find higher parasympathetic tone, resilient immune markers and, most intriguing, brief surges of gamma-wave coherence in the cortex, the same signature that appears in seasoned meditators. In plain language, the body settles, the mind clears, and awareness expands. Ancient teachers interpreted those shifts in energetic terms. They said that 2 principal currents, Ida and Pingala, spiral up the spine along invisible pathways called nadis, crossing at the chakras. Most people breathe shallowly, so these currents never equalize, and the central route, the sushumna, stays locked. Full diaphragmatic breathing evens the flow. When the left and right streams balance, the middle channel opens, prana rises naturally, thoughts pause, a bright, spacious clarity fills consciousness. The same geometry appears in Taoist drawings of the microcosmic orbit and in esoteric Christian icons of the Ascension. Different cultures, identical map. None of that remains theory once you sit down and breathe correctly. Choose a quiet place, straighten the spine as if the crown of the head were pulled upward, and let the chin tip slightly inward. Close the lips, rest the tongue lightly against the palate, and draw air through the nose until the lower abdomen swells forward. Pause for the briefest instant, no strain, then let the exhale leave through a relaxed mouth, sensing the belly ease back toward the spine. At first keep the rhythm natural, perhaps 5 slow breaths each minute. After 2 or 3 minutes, the inhale will lengthen, the exhale will soften, and a gentle wave will seem to move down the back on inhalation, up the front on exhalation. Exactly the circuit described in the old texts. Stay with that sensation, nothing to analyze, nothing to force. If a stray thought appears, notice it and return to the feeling of air and subtle motion. 10 minutes are enough to feel the background noise inside the head quieten. 20 minutes deepen the effect. With practice, a half hour can pass without the usual commentary of the mind. What happens next is difficult to convey in clinical terms, yet countless testimonies agree. Colors appear more vivid, sounds more nuanced, time seems to stretch, and a lucid stillness surrounds everyday activity. Some call it heightened consciousness, others coherence, others communion, but labels matter less than direct experience. The point is that a simple, repeatable change in breathing shifts the baseline state of reality itself. It is not imagination. EEG and fMRI studies confirm the neurological shift, heart rate monitors reflect the autonomic balance, and experienced practitioners show altered cytokine profiles consistent with reduced inflammation. Body, brain, and the intangible field of awareness move together. Because the mechanism is so direct, every breath becomes an opportunity to practice. Walking to work, inhale through the nose for 4 silent counts, let the belly expand, exhale for 4 counts, and notice the shoulders drop. Waiting at a red light, repeat the same pattern. Moments of irritation, moments of fatigue, moments of scattered attention. Each is a doorway back to the balanced breath, the balanced currents, the balanced mind. Gradually the nervous system relearns that pattern. Stress responses shorten, creativity returns, sleep deepens. The change is cumulative and it costs nothing but awareness. That is why the yogis called pranayama a royal road. They were not speaking metaphorically. They meant that breath is the most direct instrument most of us will ever touch, capable of transforming physiology and perception in the same gesture. You do not have to chase visions, melt snow in a cave, or hold your breath to the brink of blackout. You have to breathe consciously, fully, every day. The shift may seem subtle at first, yet, with consistency, it becomes the fastest, most reliable way to raise consciousness and watch reality bend around that elevation. Everything else that follows on a spiritual path begins with that single, deliberate inhale. The longer you keep up the practice, the more noticeable the structural changes become. Within a few weeks, the diaphragm thickens and the intercostal muscles gain flexibility, which means each breath moves a larger volume of air with less effort. Heart rate variability, the tiny, healthy fluctuation between beats, widens, signaling a nervous system that can shift smoothly between alertness and rest. People who track their sleep often see slow-wave stages deepen and morning pulse rates drop. None of this requires additional techniques. It is the body's automatic response to a steadier flow of oxygen, carbon dioxide, and electrical activity along the vagus nerve. Mental patterns follow suit. Tasks that once triggered irritation now appear in a calmer perspective, not because external circumstances have changed but because the respiratory rhythm no longer feeds a constant trickle of stress chemistry. Decision-making improves. The interval between a stimulus and the usual reactive thought stretches just enough to notice alternatives. Memory consolidates more cleanly during sleep, so daytime planning feels less cluttered. Even cravings, whether toward food, social media, or argument, lose some of their urgency as the chemistry that underpinned them loses its foothold. At a subtler level, meditators report that recurring emotional themes rise to the surface, play out, and subside without the old charge. The yogic model explains this as prana flushing through blocked Na with Macron-S. Psychology frames it as stored somatic tension finding a release valve. Neuroscience sees limbic circuits learning new response curves. Whichever language you prefer, the outcome is the same. The storylines in the mind become transparent, easier to watch than to obey. That transparency is what the Himalayan teachers called the first glimpse of expanded consciousness. It is not yet the full ascent of Kundalini, but it is a stable platform from which deeper practice can proceed. Daily life then becomes the proving ground. A commute delayed by traffic is an invitation to lengthen the exhale rather than tighten the jaw. A difficult conversation is a chance to track the movement of breath along the spine and keep the nervous system coherent while words unfold. Repetitions accumulate, and the body begins to treat the balanced pattern as the new default, even under moderate pressure. The original texts promised that such conditioning would burn karma. Modern researchers might say that the stress response threshold resets upward. Both point to a person who carries a wider field of awareness into every situation. With time, the boundary between formal practice and ordinary breathing blurs. You notice that the diaphragm stays relaxed while walking, that the tongue naturally rests on the palate, that the inhale and exhale match themselves without counting. Moments of quiet intensity, watching sunset light shift on a wall, hearing the sudden hush after rain, arrive unannounced and linger longer than before. These are small confirmations that the energetic channels are open enough for perception itself to widen. The reality shift is not fireworks. It is the ongoing discovery that consciousness is broader, quieter, and more luminous than the personality that once tried to manage everything. None of this requires belief, only persistence. 10 conscious breaths when you wake, 10 before each meal, 10 before sleep, and the system recalibrates. Extend one of those windows to 20 minutes whenever circumstances allow and the deeper effects compound. Miss a session? The skill does not vanish. You pick it up with the next inhale. The ancients preserved the method because it never depended on temples, hierarchies, or seasons. Only on the willingness to pay attention to something that is happening anyway. When historians single out cultures renowned for their clarity, early Taoist sages, Vedic seers, the Tibetan hermits who sat in snow fields, they are describing societies that placed breath at the center of education. Our own era can reclaim that center without abandoning technology or civic life. A phone reminder that vibrates every hour can cue 3 slow inhalations. A quiet corner of an office can serve as a midday retreat. Evening walks can double as moving pranayama. The method is portable, scalable, and free, which is precisely why it endures. If you follow it long enough, one day the distinction between inhaler and inhalation dissolves. There is simply breathing, and within that movement a vast stillness that has been present all along. Yogic texts label the state samadhi. Contemplative Christians called it the prayer of quiet. Modern psychologists speak of non-dual awareness. The label is incidental. What matters is that consciousness recognizes itself as prior to thoughts, moods, or even the physical heartbeat, and that recognition changes every subsequent moment. Begin where you are: upright spine, quiet nose, belly soft, inhale, exhale. Let the practice prove itself. Minute by minute, rib by rib, thought by thought, the internal climate clears, and the wider reality that mystics hinted at becomes less a promise than a lived fact. Breath was the entry point for them. It remains the entry point for us. Use it, and the shift is not merely possible, it is inevitable.